Guitar! Drums!
Hello, this is Mr. Griffin. I'm doing a new My Perspective video. Today, I'm looking back on an individual that really, of all the deaths that have happened in the past few years, I think this guy tends to be forgotten. And of course, I'm speaking of the late Brian Pillman. I remember, first I'm going to start it off backwards. I remember, the day they announced Brian Pillman had died. I actually found out about it the next day. And they announced it that night at a pay-per-view. I believe it was called WWF, as they were at the time, Bad Blood, which he was supposed to appear. But then they announced at the beginning of the show, I believe, that Brian Pillman had passed away. They found him in his hotel room. Then, of course, the next night, it didn't really seem real to me until the next night on Raw. And I think, I know there have been other deaths in wrestling, but most of these guys were guys that growing up, these were guys that were like not really active. And this is the first one that really hit me. I mean, I know there have been other deaths of guys being active, particularly in World Class Championship Wrestling. The deaths of David Von Erich, Mike Von Erich, Chris Von Erich, and later Kerry Von Erich, and of course Gino Hernandez. But to be honest, I didn't really watch those guys until I saw reruns later, like in the late 80s. And of course, Kerry Von Erich was in 1993. But I think the reason they didn't hit me that hard because I didn't follow them that often. And this is not to diminish or dismiss them in any way or discredit them or disrespect them, but I think because I didn't follow them that hard, I didn't have, let's say, the emotional investment in them. It didn't hit me that hard, and I really didn't understand the significance of their deaths until years later, in retrospect. Pillman, I have to honestly say, was the first wrestling death that really hit me in the gut. Because this was a guy I followed from, I know he started in Stampede Wrestling. And I know before that he was a football player for the Cincinnati Bengals. And before that in college for the Miami of Ohio. But I really didn't, I had heard of him through magazines, but I had never really seen him until he came to World Championship Wrestling. Of course, at that point, it was still under the NWA banner at that point. And when I first saw this guy, I saw this young, good-looking man, nice build, a little on the smaller side, but I was like, well, let's see what he's got. And he would do some of these incredible moves, which for that day and age were revolutionary, which now would be, they're pretty much commonplace. Like that springboard top rope clothesline that CM Punk does. Well, the first guy I ever saw do it was Brian Pillman. In fact, he used that as his finisher for a long while. Or some of the top rope moves, like the top rope splash. Now I know he wasn't the first one to do it. I mean, obviously Superfly Jimmy Snuka preceded him, but he was one of the better ones at it. And he was really innovative. And then my big impression of Pillman, biggest impression that he left on me, was Halloween Havoc 1989, when he took on the total package Lex Luger for the NWA United States Championship. And the funny thing about that match, and I remember thinking this back then, even as a young kid who barely knew anything about the ins and outs of wrestling, and Jim Ross kind of reconfirmed it on the Brian Pillman Loose Cannon DVD that WWE came out with a couple years ago. He said Pillman was the rookie. Luger was already the established guy going into the match. Yet Pillman brought the best out of Luger. And that says something. Pillman, by rights, was a rookie, as Jim Ross pointed out. Yet he was the star of that bout, even though he lost. When, in all honesty, he should have won. But Luger was still an over heel at the time, so I understand why they had Luger go over. But in reality, Luger should have lost. But, of course, he would go on and win his first championship, I believe in the beginning of 1990. Yes, it was beginning of 1990, with a lesser-known wrestler, but a lot of long-time fans might remember him, Tom Zink, a.k.a. the Z-Man. Ugh, what a horrible name. But anyway, when they won the now-defunct United States Tag Team Championship, and were actually not a bad tag team. They really weren't, but there was just something that was lacking there. There was just something, that was missing. I mean, these two, they were young, handsome, great bodies. Obviously the ladies would be attracted to them, and maybe some of the funny guys, but, I digress. But there was just something just missing from that team, even though they worked pretty well together. And then, of course, Pillman broke out on his own, being in various situations and feuds. The biggest one I remember him being, it was against a group that he would later join in the last years of his career, the Four Horsemen. Where they did a spot where the Four Horsemen injured his arm prior to a War Games match. And then, of course, there was the spot where Sid Vicious nearly broke Pillman's neck in a botched powerbomb spot. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. In fact, if I can find it, I'll put the link to it down below in the description box so you can see it. I mean, it was just nasty, even to a cynic of pro wrestling. I know they'll say, oh, well, they know how to fall. How do you know how to fall to land on your damn neck? You can't learn how to fall on that. Especially with the guys doing the move wrong anyway. Anyway, that's another debate. Then, of course, in 1991, in the fall of 1991, Pillman would win his first singles championship in WCW. The light heavyweight championship. And of course he would have what is probably his most noted feud in WCW. One of his most noted feuds was against New Japan's Jushin Thunder Liger. And I remember watching scenes from their first ever bout on Christmas night. And from what I saw, but it was spectacular. Then, of course, their rematch at Super Brawl 2 the following year, I still have it on tape somewhere, and I'm sure it's still around. And one thing I'm going to try to do, getting off topic for a second, in these My Perspective videos, I make references to matches. I'm going to try to look them up on YouTube and have the link in the description box for you. That way you can see these matches I'm talking about. In fact, my older My Perspective videos, I'm going to try to go back and start adding that to them, to any events or links any events or matches that I might refer to. But yeah, it's a must-see match. Of course, Pillman would go on to distinguish himself as a good light heavyweight champion, even having a pretty decent bout with his former tag team partner Tom Zink. And he would finally lose it to Scotty Flamingo at Beach Blast 92. Scotty Flamingo is who people would later know as Johnny Polo, and of course, more famously, Raven. And then came the heel turn in 1992. And Pillman would more or less stay a heel the rest of his career. He had a brief but good tag team with Barry Windham where they challenged then WCW World Tag Team Champions Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas for the belts. It culminated in a blow-off match at Starrcade 1982 where Pillman and Windham lost to Douglas and Steamboat. But later, when Windham wanted to break off and go after the NWA World title, which was held by the Great Muta at the time, Barry Windham, on camera anyway, I understand this was more behind the scenes, but on camera, they had him introduce Pillman, the stunning Steve Austin. And for those fans that don't know, yes, it's the same man that would later become Stone Cold Steve Austin. And the two would form a tag team and eventually take the name the Hollywood Blondes. And the Hollywood Blondes was a very, very innovative tag team. Very entertaining heels. And I remember Steve Austin talking about his time with Pillman during that point. He would say, we were meant to be put together with people to have good matches, but we were never expected to get over. But we did. And he said that kind of rubbed the WCW front office the wrong way, which I felt was a huge mistake, because I felt the Hollywood Blondes were really on a roll at the time they made them drop the titles to the Horsemen, which I have nothing but great respect for Arn Anderson. But the team of Arn Anderson and Paul Roma, yeah, you heard me right, Paul Roma, had no business beating the Hollywood Blondes. I would just as soon get Ole Anderson off the retirement bed with Arn at that point and have them beat the Blondes. That would have actually been more credible than Anderson and Roma ever beating them. But then, of course, they split the Blondes up. Steve would go on to a run with the United States Championship. Pillman would really not be used that much again. He still worked for WCW, but really he wouldn't have anything really substantial until late 1995 when he got involved in the Ric Flair-Arn Anderson feud, and he sided with Anderson. This, of course, led to the eventual reunion of the Four Horsemen. And, of course, as we know now, the fourth member was a young, and I always stress this, insane Chris Benoit. And this foursome was getting traction. But then there was behind-the-scenes booking issues between Pillman and then Booker Kevin Sullivan, which led to Pillman leaving. Now, no one ever really knows whether it was really a work or if this was really his feelings. No one ever debates. I tend to believe it was real, but I can understand the arguments of people who want to say, no, this was a work, this was a work. I can kind of see where they're coming from, but I tend to think it was real. Then, of course, Pillman would show up for a time in ECW, where he made that first appearance, to where Pillman, who by then had established the loose cannon character, he would stand in the ring and actually put down ECW, despite the fact the fans was cheering for him. He looked out the crowd and said, "There's only one thing to do in this place. I'm gonna yank out my Johnson and take a piss in this hellhole." Of course, they stopped him before he actually could even undo his zipper. But there are fans to this day that'll say, "Did you see what Brian Pillman did? He was in the ECW arena. He pulled out his dick and actually pissed in the ring," which clearly on the video, that did not happen. Clearly that did not happen. But it got people talking. And he was probably the hottest free agent at that point. ECW was wanting him. WCW was actually wanting him back. WWE was interested in him. So he was actually working all three companies. And he was on the verge of being maybe one of the biggest stars ever, making enough money that he could sock away for a good retirement to feed his family and to put his family through school and everything. And then the car accident happened that totally tore up his foot, which would pretty much put him on drugs for the rest of his life and career. Then when he did come back, he first commentated, but many behind the scenes said this was not enough for Pillman. Pillman wanted to be in the ring. But he kept pushing for a quick comeback, which many believe now he probably should have waited and let the injury heal more. But what he would do, he would take antibiotics or whatever to work through the pain, and then just try to work, which obviously he should have took more time off. This did lead, however, to help with the push of Stone Cold Steve Austin in the famous ankle snapping incident. And of course the time when Austin went to Pillman's home, and Pillman, as you can see in this picture, pulled out the Glock millimeter. I remember the line, he says, "Well, you're about to see when Austin 316 meets Pillman millimeter Glock." I mean, they sold it to where you really didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, it was that high drama. Yeah, it drew a lot of criticism, but one thing it did, it got a lot of attention. And of course, many say the Austin character, and there's a lot of reasonable argument on this, the Stone Cold character is really patterned after the loose cannon Brian Pillman character. And of course, you really saw the similarities when these two took on each other in a one-on-one match in 1997. And it's a shame that Pillman didn't let himself heal up more, because I think that could have been one heck of a feud at that point. Now we'll get into the perspective of Brian Pillman looking back. Looking back, his character was really innovative, both in the ring and as a character in general. In the ring as a wrestler, good high flyer. He did create some innovative moves and techniques. As a character, the loose cannon character influenced a lot of guys. Like I said, many believe, and I believe it myself, it influenced the Stone Cold Steve Austin character to an immense degree. It really did. And Austin, who both in and out of character, even says he doesn't have a lot of friends in the business. But one of the few friends he really said he had was Brian Pillman. And even though Austin's not a crier or anything, if you've ever watched Brian Pillman Loose Cannon from WWE, you could tell when he talks about it towards the end, I could have swore the man was close to tears. He didn't do it, He always stayed Stone Cold Steve Austin. But you could tell Brian Pillman's death really affected him, and it affected a lot of people. It had an effect on Bret Hart. If you've ever seen his Best There Is, Best There Was, Best There Ever Will Be video, when he talks about all his dead friends, it moves him to tears. And then I look at this picture of the Hart Foundation, which he joined, which was the hottest angle in the summer of '97, hands down. I don't care what no one says. I don't care if WCW was dominating the ratings at that point. The hottest angle in 1997, at least the summer of, was the Hart Foundation. They got so much heat. I mean, you never see heels who get cheered in their home country and internationally, but in the United States gets booed. I mean, you look at that picture. Only Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart is still alive at this point. Pillman, dead. Davey Boy Smith, dead. Owen Hart, dead. By the way, on Owen Hart, I got my perspective video on him, just him. So you can look that up sometime. But, which actually I'll put the link for that in the description box down below too. So if you choose to look at it, you could go look at it. But, yeah. And that's a sad state. You know, when I look at that picture of those 5 guys who created so much mayhem and so much excitement and entertainment for that summer of '97, and to know that of those 5, only 2 of the guys are still around. And of course, we almost lost Bret Hart in 2002. And many believe, besides the physical injury he suffered from Goldberg, that it was the stress of friends like Owen Hart, of his brother Owen Hart, of friends like Davey Boy Smith, like a Rick Rude, like a Road Warrior Hawk, and of course like a Brian Pillman, that really contribute to the stress. But back on Pillman, I will always remember him fondly. For a man who had several throat operations as a child. I don't think the boy was even three or 4 years old, and he was already having throat operations. For a guy who lost his father at a young age. For a guy who was told he was too small to play football. But through determination and just through determination and just work ethic, made it to the Miami of Ohio football team, made it to the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, granted, he wasn't no big superstar in the NFL, but how many players never even make it to the NFL? Never even make it to sit on the bench. So, and then of course he chose wrestling. And he was great at it. And I'll be honest, he's one of those guys, I don't know how he was as a person, but I can definitely say I miss him as a performer and wish he was still around. And on another tragic note, and this happened a while back, his stepdaughter, Alexis Reed, who also had her own wrestling career going in early 2008 as a valet and ring girl under the name Sexy Lexi Pillman. Unfortunately, she died at only 26 years of age from injuries sustained in an automobile accident. So this video, though it's on Brian Pillman, it's also dedicated to Melanie Pillman as well. And let me make one other note. The music that you heard at the beginning of the video, that was Brian Pillman's original ring entrance music, with the days before copyright and license came to play. It was by Def Leppard, called Rocket, and that was his original theme song. I just thought it would be apropos to use it here in this video. So to Lexi and to Brian Pillman, peace. I hope you're together in heaven.